Welcome to the new Chemist. We're glad you're listening. Feel free to download this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. Here on the new Chemist, we discuss chemistry, which simply put is the science of change, as well as the other sciences, careers, community, research, and COVID-19. We're happy you're tuning in. My guest today is Pranav Dorbala, a research fellow at Brigham Hospital. Thanks for joining me today. It is so good to hear from you. Just briefly, I'll inform my audience about you. Pranav Dorbala worked as a research associate in 2016 at Brigham Hospital. Following that, he was an R&D intern concerning interventional pain management. In 2016 to 2018, he worked as an undergraduate researcher in a computational fluid dynamics lab. Following that, he worked as an undergraduate researcher in hemodynamics and microfluidics, and currently he serves as a computational heart failure research fellow. Pranav Dorbala was a colleague of mine, or is a colleague of mine. We met in freshman year, a very excellent and studious person. He completed his Bachelor of Science degree in biomedical engineering at Georgia Institute of Technology, and is currently working on a master's degree in computer science. Please welcome Pranav.
Thanks, Pranav, for joining me today. It's good to have you on. So just as we get started, Pranav, I heard you are a research fellow at Brigham Women's Hospital. What have been your longstanding interests in the field of science?
So my longstanding interests have been primarily in the field of computational cardiology, mainly computational research. So trying to leverage some of the things a computer can do, but a human can't easily, to try to improve the field of medicine. Yeah. So mainly identifying kind of patterns that humans currently see, because right now doctors undergo a lot of training and see a lot of cases, right? And one of the things that I've heard quite often from a lot of physicians is that there's like a little bit of a gut instinct that people develop, right? Which is from seeing repeated examples of illness or seeing repeated patients and things like that. And so I'm trying to work on methods of quantifying that, possibly through a computer and through algorithms of sorts. So it's a very interesting field, and I encourage anyone who's interested in computers and computational research to really explore the field.
Okay, that's good. That's good. So computational fluid dynamics is what you focus on in terms of like within the scope of the cardiovascular system, or what's your focus primarily?
Yeah, so my research at Georgia Tech kind of started out in CFD, computational fluid dynamics.
Yeah.
So kind of measuring how the kind of fluid flow can be characterized using specific numbers like Reynolds number or shear stress, things like that, to identify points of interesting character in the flow, right? Like if there's a point of stagnation where the fluid's not flowing, that can be for clotting risk. Gradually, I've kind of moved from that towards to seeing kind of how physiology affects flow, and more about how flow influences physiology in terms of kind of cardiac remodeling, kind of heart failure and stuff like that as well.
Okay. So in terms of the project that you're working on, do you do any has your work had any impact on what's clinical practice, or is it primarily just in theory?
Well, it's currently unpublished, so we'll see where the results go.
Well, you don't have to tell me all of it if it's unpublished. You could just give me surface level.
Yeah, I'll give you the general scope, right? We're looking at a disease called heart failure, right? It's actually a syndrome, right? And
congenital?
No, it's not congenital, right? It's a function of aging. It's an aging-related illness. So cardiovascular disease has been pretty advanced, and there's been a lot of breakthroughs and innovations in the past, X number of years, let's say since like the late 1900s through now, right? And so because of that, heart patients are living longer, right? And one of the things that we're seeing is an increased prevalence of this syndrome called heart failure, right? Which is primarily characterized by dyspnea on exertion. So it means you have a hard time breathing when you exercise. Your heart function is not kind of up to spec. And it's occurring because people are living longer and people are, avoiding major heart conditions and avoiding death, MACE, right, for a longer time, major adverse cardiovascular events, for a longer time. So they're developing this disease called heart failure. And so we're looking into kind of how do you identify risk factors in heart failure, right? So currently there are a number of risk factors like age, blood pressure, smoking status, like current smoker, ever smoker, things like that. And one of the main biomarkers is a biomarker called NT-proBNP, N-terminal pro natriuretic peptide, brain natriuretic peptide, right? So NT-proBNP is extremely useful. It's a marker of left atrial stretch, and it's kind of very useful in identifying who's at risk for heart failure and who has heart failure. It's a diagnostic criteria for education. But what we're trying to do is now using techniques like ELISA, there have been a lot of high throughput kind of proteomic biomarker assays, right? So these scans look at and try to quantify levels of numbers of biomarkers, right? In the numbers of thousands. And so you have a preponderance of data now, right? You have the serum proteomics, the plasma proteomics of like literally thousands and thousands of proteins in something called a longitudinal cohort, right? So basically in the 1980s, someone in Minnesota decided to gather a group of people and called this the ERIC study. Well, not just Minnesota actually, but everywhere. But like it's a study called the ERIC study, ARIC, where there are a cohort of people that are being followed longitudinally to explore various endpoints, and our endpoint of interest is heart failure. And so in these people, in these 4,000 people, we've had serum proteomics and we know their outcomes, right? Whether they develop an event, whether they die. And so we're trying to use statistical analysis, particularly survival analysis, to identify proteomic risk biomarkers, right? But the problem is now there's so many biomarkers in this assay, right? Thousands and thousands. So statistics becomes a little tough because of multiple testing, Bonferroni correction, right? So we have to use kind of computational methods to identify, to parse this data, to identify without testing every single possible option, like protein biomarkers, but also kind of interactions between them to try to identify novel pathways to heart failure.
Okay, so are the risk factors additive?
Yeah, that's part of the hypothesis, right? So we just kind of have the data and we're generating the relationships. So we're trying to keep the specific relationships and pathways we quantify to be
Classified at this time.
Or like, I would say like, we're trying to keep it statistically provable, right? We're trying to keep it like, so that we can have the most impact in clinical care decision-making, right? So what kind of does a physician consider when putting patients on medicine early, right? Like, and how that affects, well, one of the main things also is, right, if we find proteins that people have that make them at higher risk for heart failure, right? You can target these people earlier for kind of social determinants of health interventions, just general things like that, and make sure that they try to live healthier lives because they know they're at higher risk. So, but then I guess the overall question that we're looking at is how these things affect physiology, right? How do they affect specific processes of remodeling in the heart, and what are the specific kind of outcomes that you can imagine in terms of things that are measurable in an echo and stuff like that?
Yeah, okay, echocardiogram. And also, just for people who, layman's, for people who are listening who are not familiar, ELISA, enzyme link, and immunosorbent assay. And any other questions? There are more questions to come. So, how do you maintain view of the bigger picture in your career and in your life in general?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking. One of the things I try to do is maybe not worry about some of the bigger life picture things. Like, I just try to attack everything a day at a time. I have like major career goals that I am, I've kind of set for myself and I'm trying to follow. One of those is like becoming a physician, which
Mm-hmm.
like thankfully I will begin that journey soon. And the other is kind of getting into research or doing certain things or affecting standard of care. And like I kind of have those things in the background,
Mm-hmm.
but generally I like to look at the day to day and
I
see like,
agree. I agree.
look, like I have certain things I want to do in terms of advancing my project. What can
Mm-hmm.
I do to maximize that? How do I
Mm-hmm.
kind of go forward and achieve my kind of week? Like I like to take it a day at a time, a week at a time, like a month at a time, and then
Mm-hmm.
3 months at a time. I kind of evaluate kind of once every month or so. So I have like a series of goals with increasing granularity, I would say, but I try
Okay.
to focus on the
Okay.
more immediate ones.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I was listening to there was this conversation, and it's interesting that you use the word granularity. My first introduction to that word, to be honest with you, was I was listening to this conversation. They have this discourse, this dialogue between Nobel laureates, the economics Nobel laureate, and a variety of them. And one of the, I think it was the economics Nobel laureate. He spoke about how he was talking about economic change, and he spoke about the granularities associated with making changes. And yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because many times we want to look at the big picture, but it becomes more feasible and it becomes more enjoyable when we take it one day at a time. I think I found that to be the case for me. So, how have you been adaptive and creative in the field of science, outside of or within the scope of your project? Where have you added to the flavor, the creativity flavor, or are you
Yeah.
progressively adding?
One of the things is I'm in a burgeoning field, right?
Okay.
Computational analysis in healthcare is fairly new, but
Mm-hmm.
also offers a lot of promise, particularly because I kind of straddle the intersection between technology, a field that's like really exploding at the speed of light. And like you look at in the past maybe 30 years, like the uprising of like companies like Google, Amazon, and like analytics
Mm-hmm.
as a whole, right? And technology is very advanced in terms of algorithms, machine learning, and things like that. And medicine kind of lags behind in adoption of technology for very obvious reasons, right? When it comes to someone's health, you want tried and true methods before
Mm-hmm.
anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to make sure that everything that you propose to a patient is evidence-based, is kind of
Mm-hmm.
proven in randomized controlled trials, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Like you want
Yeah.
to be very careful with how.
Very educational
And
conversation. Yeah.
no, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Keep going. Keep going. I'm listening.
But there are a number of methods that you can use, and Google and Netflix and Amazon do, particularly like, have you ever seen targeted advertisements on the internet? Like
Yeah.
there are things that Amazon, or mainly Netflix, I like to use the Netflix example, it likes to know what you want to watch before you even know it yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's I think a field that can really be ported to medicine, right? There's a potential because an individual patient that isn't really the best or isn't really the most up to date on their own condition, right? They're not fully aware of their own genetic predispositions. They don't have a full genome mapping, and they don't really know how to interpret that. I mean, some do definitely, and maybe that's a controversial statement. So I would love to have that discussion at some point. But there's a number of ways to use kind of genomic and omic data
Uh-huh.
to try to predict whether a person is going to be sick or whether they have kind of a predisposition towards getting sick, or if we can profile people. It's a field called phenotyping, right? It's very
Mm-hmm.
advanced in kind of technology and consumerism in terms of predicting what products you want to buy, what movies you want to watch. And it's very useful in predicting outcomes. But I believe that particularly personalized medicine, or the field of
Mm-hmm.
applying this kind of technology
Yeah.
to derive therapies, but also risk prevention and preventative medicine that are tailored to individual patients, has a huge promise, right? And so now is kind of right at the cusp of when people are noticing this and are beginning the experiments, are beginning the trials to really implement these things. And I think I kind of have a perspective as kind of a graduate student in computer science at Georgia Tech, as someone who's a fan of the field of computer science, right?
Mm-hmm.
To be able to see what changes are happening, what are the new advanced methods, and propose those to kind of examine things that have been traditionally rooted in statistics, but to try to use other algorithms. Not, well, computation and statistics are very hand in hand and very close related, but like to try to shift maybe purely statistical methods towards maybe computational feature identification methods, using some of these things like Google and Amazon and et cetera. Machine learning as a whole.
Yeah. I can tell you. You've well read. So as you progress, how have you started and found the right environment for you to thrive scientifically and intellectually? Obviously, you went to Georgia Tech, and that's where I met you. And you continued studying there, and now you're at Brigham. So how did you seek or find the right environment for you to thrive scientifically and intellectually? What did you do? Did you obviously you have a system in which you go through your days and then you evaluate it every 3 weeks or anything of that sort? What was the guide for you to find the right environment? Or how did you find it?
I would say I'm lucky in that the right environment kind of found me, but I like to say the environment is defined by the mentor.
Wow.
Right? So to have a good mentor, to have a good roadmap, to make kind of a map of the possibility, right? To everything you can do, who you want to be, what you want to do, right? And to find that and to really be inspired by the people you work with in a way that kind of pushes you, I think is quite important. So like, just regardless of your situation, whatever situation you're in, whatever research you're in, whatever lab you're in, like to try to find a mentor, to try to find someone who inspires you, a project that inspires you, or coworkers that inspire you, and try to like be more like them in your own mentors, and to take kind of ideas from successful people and to try to implement that in your own life, and to try to find a group of successful people, I guess. Yeah,
I've heard statements such as iron sharpens iron, and I've also heard statements such as, if you want to know where you'll be in the next 5 years, look at who you're hanging around. So it does, I think experience does show that your company and the friends you keep do affect where you end up and the choices that you make, whether you know it or not. What have been your most effective and impactful ideas to date in your personal life or in your academic studies, or even your approach to studying? What has been most effective and impactful?
Well, I'd like to direct this question a little bit differently, right?
Okay, do you?
One of the things my dad loves to say, he's really active in the startup space and has dealt with a lot of startups, is like ideas without execution are just hallucination, right? So like anyone can have like great ideas, and like ideas can be effective, and maybe some people are idea people, right? Like idea men. And for me, like I like to say, like maybe I'm not in the stage of my career for that yet. I'm more of the execution, right? I gotta get the execution down, right? So one of the things is I have great mentors that have a lot of ideas, right? And it's up to me to implement that and execute it, right? So there's time for me to understand fully, especially in the field of medicine and space, right? Like I have a lot to learn, and I will be learning all about physiology and all about medicine. And at that point, when I have an informed kind of scope of the field, I'll go to try to make ideas. But right now, I want to really perfect my craft of execution, right? Okay. So like to take an idea and to really bring it into fruition and reality. And that's kind of worked well for me, because a lot of people have ideas, and a lot of people who are much smarter than me come up with great ideas and great grants and projects. And I'm glad to be a part of them and to be able to execute them. But I think that's also a great skill to have, is to like affect your idea, right? In the question, effective and impactful, right? So to affect or to implement an idea. And so I've had a lot of interesting kind of things that I've implemented. I can't take credit for the idea, but I can definitely take credit for the implementation in terms of kind of advanced methods of biomarker identification. I really come back to this because that's my work and I'm most proud of it.
Okay, but there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. So the biomarker pipeline that I made to try not only to help identify conditions related to heart failure, but also CAD, exercise metrics, etc. Like building a code base, a software for physicians and clinicians to use to identify and impact kind of medicine and treatment, right? But also kind of some of the, exercise, talking to patients, like affecting kind of other ideas and grants and projects through my capstone project and etc. are also things I love to do. So
yeah, there's nothing wrong with being humble. I completely agree. It's important to see your scope and see your place in the whole project where you are at this time. So yeah, if where you are, where you're functioning is to execute ideas, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Like even with me, I'm of course there are a lot of people there who are much smarter than I am, and that's okay. I'm okay with that. So because it's a journey, and like I am working on this project. I can't really talk about it too much because we haven't published a lot of things as yet. But I'm working on this project in which we're coming up with alternatives to inhibit quorum sensing, which is this communication pathway within bacteria, among bacteria, density-dependent regulation, and we're making modifications to different molecules and stuff like that. And the ideas, most of the time, as up to this point, I've been following or executing the ideas that have already been decided on. So, nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. So, it's interesting that you are working on a cardiac project. I just thought I would drop this in. I remember being in 2310 class in which you worked on the cardiac, that watch. So it seems like that's been a common trend, common trend for you. So how do you maintain a balanced life given all your responsibilities and accomplishments? Are you balanced, Pranav? Or are you working to attain balance? Or how are you keeping it together, even in this pandemic? Let me make it more practical. How are you still stable?
I think part of that is really loving what you do, loving your work. And I think that's become more crucial in the pandemic. Like you can see my bed is right behind me, my computer is right here. So like in a given day, in a given time, I walk all 2 feet to my work, I go to bed, I work, go to bed, right? So like, but the point is when your work is kind of what you want to do and when it's fun, right? It doesn't really feel like work. And that's kind of a cliche maybe, but like, I think to repeat another cliche to add on to it, sometimes like it's about the journey and not the destination. And this is something I've kind of really taken to heart more recently, but like when you're focused on the destination, right? And you're just staying on the destination, you have to get there, right? You kind of, you lose the present. You lose kind of, you're always thinking about when I get here, you're always planning for if I don't get here, what do I do next? And then when you do get here, you're like, okay, like great, like now what, right? So you really have to enjoy the process, enjoy the journey more than wanting to get to the destination. And I think when you do that, everything balances out in terms of life, responsibilities. I mean, gratefully for me during the pandemic, I don't really have that many responsibilities for life or otherwise, right? I'm at home like most other people, kind of very like minimal contact with other people, right? I live with my grandmother, so trying to minimize the number of people I have contact with. And, I've kind of found a balance in working virtually with my team. So they're a great set of people. I love working with them and that's like social contact. But, when you enjoy your work and if that's all you have, it's not so bad.
That's good. So in terms of your success, what did you say has complemented your success so far?
Well, going right back to the execution being right. So I think I've been successful due to my mentality in that, like when someone asks me to do something, maybe I have a little bit of fearlessness in saying, yeah, sure, I'll do it. Or like, I'm not so worried about failure when I take the project. And I've failed. I've done a number of projects unsuccessfully. I've kind of gotten a lot of, I wouldn't classify, negative results as failure, but yeah, I've seen my fair share of negative results. It's definitely not failure, but like, I'm not, there's a low hesitation to trying new things, to trying or learning new things. And so I think that being willing to do stuff, being willing to step into a new role, being willing to try to be what your team needs has really helped my success in a way, right? Like, I think most of my success is because I found right people to guide me, and people have kind of pushed me along my own path while I've kind of focused on doing the best I can. So great mentors at work, great mentors at home, right? And people have a plan and kind of help me chart that plan for my own goals. And I just kind of follow what people say. So it's been great. But yeah, being willing to do anything that people throw at me, regardless of kind of whether it's difficult, time consuming, like tedious. Most of the time it's really tedious.
Yeah,
but
that's fair. That's fair. Yeah. So how have you maintained vision and teamwork in your environment? How do you maintain those things? How do you maintain sight of your goals and your endeavors, as well as the collaborative spirit in your environment and in your endeavors?
So I guess just to give a little bit of background, my project is very computational based, right?
Okay.
But my team is they're all very used to statistical methods, but not really focused on computational methods. And so they know the statistics behind an idea, and they're very good at implementing things, but maybe I have a little bit of a different skill set. And so a lot of computational things fall on me, but to maintain vision and teamwork, I think it's important to have an outlook about teaching, right? Or to try to teach others, to try to convey your thing. It's not just about doing, but also teaching and laying the groundworks for others to repeat what you've done, but also to learn from your mistakes and learn from your kind of detours to come back to your ideas. So I'll explore something new computational method, new like code method, new results. But then I always take a step back to summarize my results, to come back, teach it to everyone, even if they're not, related to the project, so that they can maybe think of ideas to implement in their own projects, right? And that's kind of worked out well for me, but I think it's also kind of helped the people around me, I hope.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Reproducibility is important in science, especially in research. Yeah. So Pranav, why did you choose BME as a field to major in? You are Georgia Tech. Why did you choose BME? What was appealing to you? I know I chose it. However, why did you choose it?
Well, I'm curious as to why you choose BME, right? So like let's hear what you have to say, and then maybe I'll repeat what your answer is.
Oh, definitely. Okay, sure. Let's go there. But initially I chose it, even though I ended up changing my major afterwards. Initially I chose it because I was interested in medical device design. However, as time progressed, my interest became more centered around drug design, and biochemistry provided me a good foundation, a good impetus. And in many ways, I'm actually doing a lot of medicinal chemistry, or I'm starting to move around that target for my research at this time. So definitely I'm along a path that's heading toward a good direction, I would say so, and I'm thankful for it. So what about you?
Well, I think BME and Georgia Tech kind of fell nicely because one, I'm kind of in a way a natural born engineer. Like I like to figure out how things work. I like to take things apart. I think that's kind of what my parents say was the first things, like, oh, this kid has to be an engineer, because I took apart everything in my house. Like
I did the same thing, dude. I did the same thing.
Definitely. Yeah. There's something about the curiousness, I think, of maybe a young kid. But also I think I kind of I maintained that curiousness through high school, through science, right? Being scientists are innately curious people, I believe. And so engineering was kind of not only how do scientific principles function, but I think there was a little bit of practicality in the realness in some of the things that engineers explore, right? And some of the phenomena, like mechanical engineering is really focused with how do you get specific mechanical things to work better. Biomedical engineering is more about how you get specific kind of medical phenomena to work in an interesting way. And so I always knew I wanted to be a physician. I think that was kind of my
heartbeat.
That was my main goal for the first 1/3 of my life. And I think I was kind of predisposed towards an engineer, towards being an engineer. I think my father was an engineer
Mm-hmm.
way back in a different life. Now he does work related to executive things, but
Mm-hmm.
I think he kind of inspired me, and I wanted to, I knew that college was never going to be the last step for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was an opportunity to kind of do something I enjoy
Mm-hmm.
and to really kind of pursue my passion in a way. And biomedical engineering kind of very much lent itself towards that.
Sounds like a little flame. Yeah, which is very good. So do you have any advice to those wanting to pursue the field that you're currently working in? So computational work, you could speak towards those wanting to pursue computational work in a biomedical context, or those wanting to pursue engineering degrees, or whatever you prefer.
Yeah, so like for those wanting to pursue and like computational work, right? Like get involved early, I would say, like learn to code. It's never too late to learn to code, to learn, how to do all these things. To learn, it's a different type of logic, right? You look at things in a very algorithmic way.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that outlook is good to have at some point, to really be able to distill decisions down to algorithms in life, but also to be able to, look at specific logical statements, to look at logical, code, to be able to do that. Then just find projects that you're interested in, right? To follow the field. I want to say follow the money, but it's more about following the project, following the idea, right? Find people that are doing what you want to do and get in and try to see if you can help in any way, contribute. I think I kind of started out doing a lot of volunteer positions or like unpaid positions. Research at college is always unpaid, but so I kind of started out there. I really got invested. I developed one of the things I like to say is the value is determined kind of by your technical skill set in a way. So like I really focused on building my technical skill set in terms of things I could do, things I understood, and kind of followed my passion, some of the projects from there. And I think getting an engineering degree is very much similar. Like you find out you want to do it, and then you try to follow a project that has done it, and you kind of get in the field. And so, yeah, I'm pretty sure there's all sorts of advice for wanting to get involved in medicine.
Yeah.
Pretty cut and dry.
Yeah, that's true. So what's the most beneficial advice you ever received?
Well, yeah, I think there's two pieces kind of hand in hand. I mean, it's really involved in my kind of decision making right now and kind of one of the decisions I have to make. So like, I will say like, the first thing is don't focus on the destination, enjoy the journey, right? If you're focusing on a destination, you're definitely not going to enjoy what happens once you get there, right? So like, if you enjoy the journey, then the destination kind of fades away. It's not as important, and you don't get as hung up in it. And so I think that's very critical, right? So like, not like have a plan where you're going, but at the same time, like enjoy the now, right? Enjoy the process. And I guess the other thing is someone recently told me like, if you want to be a doctor, right, be a good be a good doctor first, right? Like there's a sort of responsibility in the word. Like, so don't focus on research. Don't focus on, oh, I want to be a cardiologist. I want to be interventional radiologist. Like, don't focus on any of that, right? And like, be fundamental, like shore up your fundamentals, right? If you want to be a doctor, be a good doctor first and foremost. There's a certain responsibility of the word or of the role of physician when you have your patient's life in your hands, etc. Like, be a good doctor first, then research, right? And this is from a very prominent research physician, right? So someone who's made their claim on research, right? And they're telling me like, be a good doctor first, research comes second. And that kind of really like rang true for me, because maybe all I've seen is research. Like all I've done is research. And I've kind of seen physicians and I've seen their work, and like it really gave me the step back I needed to understand, like, look, like now is the time to train in that, like to train in being a good clinician, being a good, person first, then being a good doctor. Like there's something with the word that
Yeah.
it's a responsibility, not only to yourself but to others, to society, I guess.
Mhm.
And so be a good doctor. Once you are a good doctor, find something you love,
Mhm.
research, do it, and you'll be fine, right? But
Yeah.
be a good doctor first.
Yeah,
So
I
I guess.
agree. I agree. Yeah, I can tell you're very passionate. I almost feel inspired. At the same time, I think it's important to remember that now is the time for us to take advantage of the opportunities that we have in front of us and try and make the most of them. So Pranav, even in this pandemic time. So Pranav, it was really good to talk with you. Thanks for joining me today.
Concept development 3. Structures, conformations, and projections. Structures are diagrammatic representations of different molecules, and they provide a means of understanding what is occurring in nature. There are a variety of different structures used in chemistry. The main examples in the following discussion will be Lewis electron dot structures, condensed structures, and bond-line structures. Lewis dot structures are built on some key ideas such as the Adams valency and the octet rule. There are also specific exceptions for period 3 and beyond. Valency. Valency refers to the amount of electrons an atom will lose, many times resulting in a positively charged cation gain, many times resulting in a negatively charged ion anion or share, typically occurring in covalent molecules, in order to have a stable noble gas electron configuration. Valency can be determined using the periodic table. The group number, vertical column numbers in the periodic table is designated the valency, typically, and this valency normally corresponds with charge or oxidation number, and its subsequent sign is dependent on the type of atom, its reactivity, and what it is reacting with. Also, you have the octet rule, which is a principle with applications in resonance theory, simple chemical mechanisms and reactions. There are exceptions for period 3 and onward, depending on the atom, its reactivity, and what it is reacting with. There are exceptions to the octet rule. There are different ways to write structures. You have the condensed structures, you have the bond-line structures, which are typically seen in organic chemistry, and you have different conformations which help us to better understand the interactions of atoms and their bond angles when it comes to angle strain, torsional strain, etc. You have projections such as the Newman projection and Fisher projection, which can be read about in other texts. Thanks for listening. We're glad you were able to tune into this podcast. Once again, this is The New Chemist, where we discuss chemistry, which simply put is the science of change, as well as the other sciences, careers, community, research, and COVID-19. Thanks again for listening. Note, the views on this podcast represent those of my guests and I.